good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. My name is Paul Daugherty. I'm here representing the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation. Today, we're presenting a virtual training implementing a common location reference for daily and disaster operations. This session will be recorded and slides will be made available on the Natslike Foundation site. That is at www.natslikefoundation.org this week, and you should receive an email if you're registered for this event as well. I'll be facilitating this training today with some excellent instructors, hopefully Chief Baraki and Captain Ray Rosari will be able to take it on the audio. And a little later today, we'll introduce instructor Richard Butkerite, who is Information Management Section Head with the Florida Division of Emergency Management, and he will share some experiences in the state of Florida using U.S. National Grid during the recovery phase. First, I'd like to just present a little background on who the Natslike Foundation is. The National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation has a mission to equip management and public safety with the knowledge, skills, and resources to apply decision support technology, and in the hopes that we can enhance preparedness and build a more resilient nation. So it's pretty clear a virtual training like this is one way we can help support this mission. Natslike was founded with support and guidance from an alliance of the major national public safety associations. You should recognize some of the logos here. These associations are committed to working together in partnership for the purpose of enhancing our ability to protect our citizens. Natslike has been around for about 10 years, and we are a 501c3 not-for-profit and are led by a governing board of directors that's comprised of public safety practitioners from across the nation. So while GIS is in our name, Geographic Information Systems, we are informed by the actual decision makers and responders that you all work with each day. The purpose today in this virtual training is that participants will gain hands-on skill and awareness level knowledge on how the U.S. National Grid serves as a common reference system for guiding operational decision-making in both day-to-day and large-scale catastrophic events. Our objectives really are to learn how to apply the U.S. National Grid for USNG-enabled decision support tools to enhance coordination during daily operations, and we'll focus specifically today on GPS, mobile devices, and paper maps. We'll gain insights from the field where U.S. National Grid is being used to support both daily and disaster operations. We will explore resources that are available to you right now to aid in equipping and preparing your team with U.S. National Grid geospatial decision support tools. Some key terminology just for reference when you download these slides. The U.S. National Grid, of course, is a common location area and point reference language for ground and ground-to-air operations. There's a definition here for GIS, but think of GIS as a system that allows us to see data on a map. And we want to differentiate that today with GPS, which is Global Positioning Systems, which is really a navigation system that is a part of a GIS. And again, for those of you taking notes, as a reminder, the recording and slides will be made available. For now, if you have questions, you should be able to type them into the question and answer section, which we will review at the end of the presentation. So we'll begin with a review of why we are even talking about U.S. National Grid and why we use it. We'll learn a little bit about how to apply U.S. National Grid. One of the most common questions in our last virtual training was, can my GPS use U.S. National Grid? And since that's a real foundation level skill, we will cover that in some detail today. We will then get to two case studies where U.S. National Grid has been used. One from the Virginia Beach Task Force 2 team on the South Carolina flood. And then again, from a recovery standpoint, we'll hear about Florida Division of Emergency Management. And again, at the end, we will discuss the question and answer. So we're going to begin with a quick review of the U.S. National Grid and why we're using it. And I believe Chief Baraki has just jumped on. And we will explain some of the common reasons we use U.S. National Grid and provide some examples from both daily and disaster operations. So I'll begin the review, and Mike, if you are able to hear me and join in, you can take over whenever.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect time.
Very well. So thank you. We've been listening the entire time, and thank you so much for the lead-in. But my name is Michael Baraki. I'm a district chief with Virginia Beach Fire. I'm also a plan section chief with Virginia Task Force 2, one of the 28 national urban search and rescue teams. And it's my pleasure to be here with not only with you from Natslike, but certainly from all your audience and members who are joined in as well. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So the problem that we have, when I say there's a problem, it's actually a good problem to have, is that we go to incidents and we have events in the country and the world that require us to be very good at USNG and certainly with providing data points that are not only accurate, but the data points that are relevant to the people who are receiving them. So obviously incidents, for example, the Haiti earthquake in 2010, shortly thereafter, weeks later, we had the Japan tsunami and earthquake that occurred that was pretty devastating to that region. We had some tornado activity, not only in Joplin, that was pretty devastating, but certainly across the south into the Midwest and into the east, we have a lot of tornado activity for which the street signs are destroyed. You have limited visual points of reference, so the USNG National Grid actually comes in very handy. You had Irene that occurred, followed by the Superstorm Sandy up into the New York, New Jersey region. That was pretty devastating. We've had some floods. And then a capstone of 2014 is that we're susceptible to anything, really. We're susceptible to any type of natural or man-made disaster for which we need to utilize the USNG to better demonstrate not only response, but certainly damage assessment and recovery. The problem, and we'll go, if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you, Paul.
Sure, and thanks a lot, Mike, for that introduction. I think, it's important to remember that not only during disasters, but even during our, large-scale training exercises, the after-action report always points to, we could have used a large-scale grid or some kind of common system to make sure we're all on the same page. So I think you'll see why in this example, even on a day-to-day operation, this is really important. So go ahead, Mike. Here's the
thank you so much, Paul. So locally, so let's take out the big disaster or the large-scale Type 3 to Type 1 event that we all either dread or look forward to in emergency response. But let's take a drowning on a beach. So in this case, the local fire and EMS system is dispatched for a drowning case at 2400 block of San Fiddler Road. That's actually a physical address. The physical address is known by the residents and the community and the tourists of where 2400 San Fiddler Road is. But if you look underneath there, we have USNG and 18 Sierra break, Victor Foxtrot break, 15781 break, 67170 is a pinpoint location on a grid of this United States and world that allows us to be accurate to the point that anybody who's coming in to provide aid to this drowning patient or this incident is able to locate and provide. And in the Virginia Beach Fire Department, we find ourselves in situations all the time and every day where communicating location is really essential to not only the success of the mission, but certainly for patient care and for patient packaging. And we are blessed every day to have these incidents in the water or in the city for which USNG becomes pretty relevant. So as we go to the next slide, you can see a street view that will come up of 2400 block of San Fiddler. And it looks like a beach that anybody would hopefully love to either see or be at. And as you arrive to this street location per se, you see water, you see sand, and you see maybe a tent there where a person is at. But is there anybody in there having a problem? Is a patient in the water? Is a patient been resuscitated and brought to shore? We don't know. But luckily our 911 center, our emergency communication center, is able to provide a little bit of mapping and help out. But you'll see that there's a lot of beach around the 2400 block of San Fiddler. And not only that, the 2400 Baca sand fiddler might be a north or south location for which one keystroke entry could put responders in different areas of the beach. So as we progress to the next slide, you'll see that 2400 sand fiddler can be pinpointed here, again, by a Google Map style that we use every day. And now you have the front of a home, it appears. You have a front of a person's home, and you have a vehicle there, and you have a street view. But you know, now the responder has a little bit of work to do. The responder has to now exit the vehicle, either knock on the door, maybe go into the rear of the structure, access the beach, now start walking the beach and figure out what's going on. And as we go to the next slide, if we geocode the map, we're able to use some of the technologies out there to better find this location and this patient. We look, there's now a North Sand Fiddler Road that comes into the mix in Virginia Beach, and you know, geocoder, obviously a great tool, and certainly we pay a lot of money for that option for our 911 center. We may be in the wrong area per se. We may not be where this patient's located. So as we progress into getting into where this location is, we look at here and we say, if we can pinpoint the access to this location to 18 Sierra break, Victor Foxtrot break, 15781 break 67170, as Ray, my colleague, will show later, we're able to really pinpoint not only for patient care, but for reporting in the future, for indication if this area of the beach is more treacherous than other areas of the beach. We're able to locate if we have an exorbitant amount of incidents or cases in this one area. We get away from addresses or physical addresses. We're able to become better reporters and certainly better and more accurate in how we solve the problem. So we look at the next slide. You know, the question would be to the group, you know, Google Maps shows 2400 Fiddler Road to be north. We have routing to incidents can pose a problem, and you all can see that by the actual location being where the pin is, or what I call a pin, but certainly where that location is, where it's being circled by Paul. GIS Online, our GIS Online gives us 2400 Fiddler Road to be south of the actual case location. So you have Google Map, you have USNG, and you have ArcGIS, and obviously what we really care about is that middle location there where we pinpointed the patient to be. So, of course, as we progress, we're able to navigate using simple maps. And these paper maps, when I say simple, you know, sometimes paper maps are pretty efficient and effective. And we can use USNG or US National Grid in any environment with or without the internet. So if we have this opportunity here to have a paper or have a gridded map in our possession and a response vehicle, in our Humvee or whatever we have out there, and we're able to use what Ray's going to show us in a minute, some basic solutions, then regardless if I have access to the internet, if I have access to the satellite, if I have access to any type of technology, I'm able to also perform the same. So the solution as we progress, the solution would be day-to-day operations can be straightforward. And day-to-day operations allows us an opportunity to use USNG every day. We don't have to wait for the next disaster, the next earthquake, tsunami, tornado activity to use this. What makes sense, like any type of critical decision-making model, is that rogue muscle memory needs to be utilized to be good at what we do. So we have to make sure that our team is ready, and we have the capacity to use USNG on paper maps, through the geospatial support that we have, through our handhelds, through our tablets, through our desktop, whatever we're utilizing. Make sure that we have the ability to use our dispatching centers, whether it's a local PSAP or whether it's a national-based dispatch center, to help us with that. So we have to get to know our GIS specialists. We have to actually make relationships with them. We have to know our city or county parcel office. Universities may help as well. But what we have to do is be prepared, and that's what today's training is, how to be more prepared, either by a locality, by a region, by a USAR team, or certainly by a federal-style government. So the next slide here is that USNG is what we consider to be a unified language that defines areas of interest. It's for reporting, it's for planning, and certainly it's for navigation. It's an actionable number, it's an actionable item, it's a location. We can actually drill into that data at a later time. We can do damage assessment. We can do cross-referencing. We can do a lot of things with that item, data. And it's certainly what we consider to be a uniform format. Ray will go over more about how uniformity it is and how uniform it is, but certainly it's a format that can be used by all. It's surely consistent. It gives us a situational awareness across jurisdictions. And finally, like NIMS, like the Stafford Act has asked us to do, HSPDs, it is certainly interoperable. And that's where I think we are going to get with USUNG in our uses. So if we show up in a large-scale incident and we have multiple agencies responding, you expect to see USNG utilize, in this case, your FEMA Form 092-5 shows that in the National Search and Rescue manual that we will utilize USNG. And so we actually have what we call policy or procedure, in this case a guideline in place that we'll use when we use the USNG when we utilize our search and rescue activities or response activities.
Great. I think that's a great overview of, why we're using US National Grid. It's certainly useful, but it's also a standard, and you can download those standards from the Natslike Foundation website if you don't already have access to them today. Now that we've really discussed the importance of US National Grid, let us quickly go over some principal elements of the US National Grid and really what is it, how does it work. Captain Ray Irizarry will lead us through this review.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. As Paul mentioned, I'm Ray Irizarry. I'm a captain with Virginia Beach Fire Department. I'm also a search team manager with Virginia Task Force 2, and that my job within the task force is exactly this sort of information, disseminating it, navigation, pinpoint of victims, navigating the team to specific locations. So I can say, number one, it's a directive from the FEMA overhead that we use this. However, it's very simple, and that's how we get 28 teams with 80 members each in an austere environment to all speak the same language. So without further ado, here's how it breaks down. There are three components of the USNG, or the grid coordinate. So first, you have the 1-8 Sierra, or the grid zone designation. After that is the 100,000 meter square identification, and that's the main difference between USNG from UTM, is that there's alpha letters that designate that 100,000 meter square, right? And then we have the grid coordinates after that, which would be the easting, the first group of 4 numbers, and then the northing is the second group, right? And up to 8 characters, 8 number characters, and that will get us to a 10 meter square, which is incredibly accurate when we're talking about fallen buildings and whatnot, and we can even drill it down even more with providing more new numbers in that respect. Ready to go to the next slide, Paul? Always remember now that USNG is functionally equivalent to MGRS, and when we start talking about GPS a little bit later on, that'll come more into play when you actually have that setting on your machine, but both of those are equivalent for our purposes. So real quick, the grid zone designation, USNG is based off of UTM, is referenced there, and you can see right here by the map that we still have longitude and latitude, if you look at it closely off to the margins there. So there is a basis for that, but the big difference is that USNG will allow us measure of distances. Hence, if you recall back to the previous slide, the 100,000 meter square, the easting and northing numbers, those are all done in meters, not in latlong like that's done in minutes or seconds. So that is a big thing. It's very simple, very easy to use. It is truncated now, so you have to make sure that, because those numbers will repeat, you have to make sure that the square ID and the grid zone designations are correct, right? And we can provide some resources at the end of this review if you need more background or training, if that's not coming back to you. But if you look at the United States here, we have zones 10 through 19, and each zone there is 6 by 8 degrees, right? So just a quick review. If anybody has any questions, please certainly type those in, right? So each grid zone designation is broken down even further, and that's where the 100,000 meter square comes into, and that's unique. So it's not a long string of numbers like you typically see in a UTM format. It is the 1-8 Sierra Uniform Jericho, and you can see that up at the top, right, top right, Northern Virginia. Right, so that's the entire state, and therein is the difference between UTM and USNG. So the alpha letters relate to the 100,000 meter square. So easting for U and the northing is J. If you look in that, if you look at the difference between UTM and the USNG. And now that letter system was designed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that was back in 1942. So based on a mathematical algorithm, I'm sure, much smarter people than I'm glad they did it, however. All right. So the next slide. Thank you. Thank you. So the most important thing here is when we're looking at this coordinate is first you have to read right, and then you read up. So we would find the grid zone designation, 18 Sierra, the square ID, Uniform Jericho, and then you'll find the numbers as they correspond. So in this slide here, 23 and 06 would be our intersection, and then we move over, right? So we read right and then up. So certainly we can move on to the next slide, please. The more digits in that string, 8 digits gives you a 10 meter square, 10 digits gives you a 1 meter square. So now let's go ahead and let's read right first. So if you look at where is the grid zone designation and the square ID, on this map right here is set at the lower left corner. It depends on the map. It could be lower right, it could be upper, whatever the case may be, but as long as you can find it on your map. And the nice thing about USNG is that it translates both paper and digital. You get the same thing. It's very nice, it's easy, it's very commonplace in emergency response now. So that, when we have this Hampstead Volunteer Fire Department map, you can see it clearly labeled there. And if that's an area that you constantly respond to, people understand that there's 18 Sierra Uniform Jericho, and then they can start rattling off their coordinates. All right? We can move on to the next one, please. So, now that we've got 18 Sierra Uniform Jericho, we know we're on the right map. We're looking at our grid coordinates now. It's 39225. So if you scroll, you read right first. So go across the bottom and find 39. And then after 39, find 2 after that. So that's the marks in between. You look in between 38 and 39, you can count, it should be 10 marks. So now we're moving over from 39, 2 marks. Very good. And then we place a line there. Certainly if you have a paper map, you can put a little tick mark, or if you have a Romer scale, you can get a little more precise. But pencil's not going to hurt it. Certainly don't be writing on your computer desktops or your mobile data terminals either, right? But we can place a place marker there and think of that location. Now the 25 would be 25 meters or 25% over to the next tick mark, right? So that is the full easting of that coordinate. 392, which is where the place mark is, and then 25 would be about 25% in between the next one. But for our purposes right here, this would be fine. We'll leave it at 2. The next string of numbers, our northing, is going to be 804, right? So we go along to the edges, find 80, then go up to 4. And the same process will apply here as well. So once we read it to the 4th tick mark, we'll put a line there, and then where those two intersect is the intersection of 392 and 804, right? We haven't gone up. Now at 97, the 97 behind the 804, that gives us 97 meters, or almost all the way up to the next tick mark, or 5th tick mark. Does everybody understand that, right? The 5th tick mark. So, just for our, like we said from the beginning, for our purposes, that'll be fine right there.
Thanks, Ray. Remember, this is really about using U.S. National Grid every day and for every operation to get comfortable. We did a more in-depth review in January 2016, and you can access the slides and the recording from that day. This is supposed to just be a quick review for you to refresh you, or if you're brand new to the topic, give you a quick introduction. So I really appreciate your help there, Ray, in that.
Yes, sir.
You know, some other resources are the USNG Center, usng.org. And in this location, you can actually see that there are map books across the United States, just like the one you saw here from Hampstead in Virginia. It's critically important that responders can access a quick U.S. National Grid map as soon as they have an incident come up. So it's not that we call up a GIS specialist when the incident occurs. It's actually, we should have these maps before the next disaster or incident. So remember, you know, use U.S. National Grid every day. Some other resources for those of you that are GIS specialists on the line, there are resources at the USNG Center, but also on the NATSIG U.S. National Grid resource site. You can see here there's a number of resources, including a very simple 1 to 24,000 map package. So for those of you that maybe use GIS or GIS specialists but have not begun to integrate with U.S. National Grid, this is a great place to start. So one of the reasons we're here today is that during our January training, there were many questions about how transitioning to USNG might be impacted by limitations in GPS technology. And the answer was it shouldn't, it doesn't. Since GPS is very important to many of your daily and certainly your disaster operations, we thought we'd give you a quick overview on the topic, just show you what this might look like on a GPS device, and give you what you need to know just to get started. And we'll provide more resources at the end. So Ray here is going to provide some instruction on how to quickly configure GPS to use U.S. National Grid.
Thank you, Paul. All right, real quick, we've talked about USNG, and now we're going to talk about GPS, and we'll see how they both correlate to one another. So quickly, the GPS system that we use in the United States, certainly, it's a constellation of 24 satellites orbiting the Earth in a geosynchronous orbit. And I just did get on gps.gov this morning. The Air Force actually is in charge of that system, and currently they have upgraded that to 27 slot configuration with another 3. So there's 30 of them floating out there, and they drop in and out as they have to have maintenance and that kind of thing. And it's in a medium Earth orbit, so that's about 12,000 miles. If that impresses anybody at a party that you're at, then change your party. Please don't go there again. However, it was funded by DOD, and that system was originally intended for the military to be able to launch submarine-based missiles more accurately. All right, we can move on to the next. All right, and it has 4 primary functions. First and foremost, position coordinates. Absolutely. Give you the distance between 2 points, right? These are receivers. You have to remember that GPS units that you hold in your hand is a receiver. It doesn't transmit anything, but it is a receiver, and I'll show you here in a second the kind of loop that it goes and how it determines that, or how it is determined for it. The distance and direction between the receiver's position and a stored waypoint, or between 2 remote waypoints, right? Then 3 is a travel progress report, velocity report basically. It tells you how fast you're going, you know, real time, your distance from any waypoint at a given moment, tracking to a waypoint, right? Your heading and direction, current speed, you know, estimated time of arrival. If anybody has a GPS that's in their car, uses GPS on their phone, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's what we're using every day. Typically in the USAR world, we're using Garmin 60s. We'll get to that here in a second. And then the 4th thing is a very accurate time measurement, and it has to be accurate because it's measuring the time that it's taking signals to travel between control station, satellites, and the user segment, right? And creating a quick reference guide is critical for that. And please, if you haven't got one, please create one. It's very simple to do. Right, so now we've got the control segment, the segments of the GPS system. The space segment, obviously that is the satellites. The control segment, where the master station monitors and ground antennas are, right, and then the user segment. So it operates that system, GPS system, operates using GPS time, which varies slightly from the UTC, or Universal Coordinated Time. GPS corrects the time anomaly to match the UTC. More, you know, everybody knows it's Zulu time or Greenwich time. And that can be because of satellite drift, you know, some kind of thing that's interrupting the signal. All that stuff is calculated in the system itself. So for our purposes today, we don't want to get too in-depth for that, right? But just know that there are 3 segments there: the control, space, and user segment. And obviously, we would be the user segment.
Yeah, and that's important for everybody to remember, is that today what we're showing you is all you're doing is configuring what shows up on the user segment. You're not touching the satellites. You're not dealing with any other thing other than that user segment, which is your receiver. So keep that in mind today as Ray goes through the user interface of the GPS.
Yes, sir. If you have found a way to touch the space segment of that, someone's going to probably be knocking on your door very quickly, I would expect. All right, so moving on. So some of the challenges for the user, though, is making sure that you have the map datum correct, right? Common map datum. The GPS Almanac updates, right? And that comes through the control segment. That's the ephemeris data, the Almanac data, all that stuff, the corrections that need to be downloaded. And that comes in your warm-up, right? Your firmware updates and whatnot. And then moving with the GPS while it is off. If you move more than 300 miles, you're going to have to, and it's, I guess I always termed it as wake it back up, give it a chance to self-update, find out where it is. So if I in Virginia get on an airplane with my GPS and fly to California, it's going to take a few minutes depending on the model of GPS. It can take as much as 20, typically not that long with the newer units, but it can take that long to wake itself up to find out where it is. But the common map datums that your GPS is always using, WAGS or WGS84 is one of the ones. NAD83 is another one, right? We configure it to display the position that we want, right? The control segment, the orbital, I mentioned that, the orbital corrections, that's on the ephemeris data stuff, right? So today, we'll just show you how to use the USNG with the correct map datum and format, position format. Right, the common map datum. There we go. All right, so here we are, the E-Trex in 10, 20, or 30, depending on which model you have, or the Garmin 60. And I'll speak more towards the Garmin. They're both very similar in their systems. But now that we've covered some of the background, here's the 2 most common models anyhow. And just for full credit, right, the screenshots that you see right there are from Orange County Sheriff's Department. Sam Chan, as a matter of fact, and they have built a GPS SOG, or Standard Operating Guideline, which is perfect. Something like that is something you can laminate, put in the bag with the GPS unit itself. You can keep it in your pocket. You can take a picture of it and keep it on your phone. Either way, that is it's a great thing, because as the chief mentioned earlier, if you don't have muscle memory with these things, you're going to be a little bit behind the curve, and you don't want to be there when it's an emergency situation day to day. Right? So if you look at some of the functions of the buttons, it'll tell you exactly what it is. So now we'll go to the setup page. So for the Garmin 60, we'll hit menu, or as I say, menu twice. You hit it menu 2 times, and it brings up, if you see the screen on the left, the main page. Right? And then you would go to that setup menu, and you would hit enter then. Right? Again, these devices might be laid out just a little bit differently, but screens look generally the same or similar. So you go to menu, hit enter, menu, rocker on the 60, hit the setup page. You can go through that. All right, so once you hit that, then we want to go to units, right? And this is where we're going to set our position format. On the 60 is on the left, as I mentioned earlier. You can see the E-Trex on the right. So, right, on the E-Trex, you would select system. But once we go ahead and hit position format, hit enter, now we're going to find, remember what I said earlier, that the military grid reference system or USNG are functionally equivalent. So depending on the age of your GPS, you might have just MGRF. That's okay. Use that as a position format. If you don't, if you see USNG, please use that as the example that's on the E-Trex picture just to the right. Right? So those are good. Now we are set for our position format. Our standard map datum. USNG always uses NAD 83 or WGS 1984 as its datum. No exceptions. So you don't have to worry about it. It's one of the two. So you can see on the picture to the left, the 60, NAD 83, perfect, right? And then certainly on the E-Trax, NAD 83. If you have old maps that have NAD 27, that's a different story. We'll have to talk about that at a later date. That's drilling down a little deeper than what we want to do right now. We're just doing a kind of a quick overview, right? And you may want to get your GIS specialist involved with that.
Yeah, that's an important point is, the standard for U.S. National Grid is to use NAD 83. If for some reason that wasn't available or you cannot find it, WGS 1984 is functionally equivalent. In other words, in most places in the country for our operation, the difference is so minimal it does not make a difference. So that's an important thing to remember. If you're using maps, paper maps that have other data, you're going to have a problem, and you should be updating your maps to NAD 83. And to do that, again, our regional leadership teams with Natslike Foundation are skilled in doing that. And there are some ways to work around it, but for today's purposes, we're working with NAD 83. And I think, Ray, next you wanted to cover the fact that we don't always have to exclude other coordinate systems. We can have NAD 83, we can have USNG on our screen, but also some alternative coordinate systems. So maybe, Ray, you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, one of the standards for the USAR system, at least in the federal system, is that we do have the latlong also selected. So if you go to the trip computer page, which on any of either GPS unit you would page over, right? Find your trip computer page and hit menu once in that field, and it will bring up what you see, that sub-menu that comes up, either reset, big numbers, change data fields is what we want to enter here for the 60, right, or even the E-Trax. And as we change the data fields, once you hit that and highlight that, you can go to either selected, right, or lat long. So the selected format for us on this particular Garmin is USNG because we selected that in our setup. What we want to do is, and that's one of the windows, what we want to do is have lat long also displayed. So that still has the same map datum, but lat long will also be displayed, and that's critical if you're working with a particular airframe or a helicopter in a big disaster that you need to communicate that information to the pilot. It certainly happened to the USAR system during Katrina, and Chief Baracchio, I'm sure, will elaborate on it earlier, but it certainly happened to he and I when we were in South Carolina at the floods just a few months ago now, it seems like. So that kind of information, have it already at your fingertips. If you think about the GPS as a translator, it will translate that information, and therefore you can give better information to where you are or where you need to be, right? So you can use that change data field option to use other coordinate systems in there. So it's a directive for the USAR system for sure. And you'll hear a little bit more later. Yeah, as I mentioned, that Chief Baracchio will elaborate a little bit later on that, why we do that. So now that we've got your GPS set up, we're using USNG, right? So it is a perishable skill using these GPSs. It can be give you a headache almost if you're not up to it, and all of a sudden it's hit the fan and you're now needing to get moving and you want to go ahead and get the information right now. You need to get moving 10 minutes ago, and now you're trying to fumble with your GPS. So please, 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 I beg you to go ahead and keep that skill up front. If you're using it every day, if you're off a fire truck or a police car or an ambulance, any emergency response, search and rescue, wilderness rescue, if you're using it every day, then you know what I'm talking about. It does have a half-life, as we've mentioned, in hours, really, instead of months or weeks even. So you have to keep up the skills, do periodic training, make yourself some reference cards, right? Make an SOG, and from the moment that you arrive at the command post, and what do you have to do for the GPS setup? Who's responsible for that setup? Right? What is the expectations for the team that's operating there? What is the information that you finally need to get out? of the search teams and go back to the incident command post. So those things, please, those things are critically important, and that certainly Natslike has some reference material that you can go ahead and use to get you started if you don't already have that in place.
All right, thank you, Ray. I think that this should help answer some of the questions that we had last week or last in January, and it really should help lay out a path forward. You know, the good news is organizations are really beginning to teach this in their existing GPS training classes. For instance, the National Association for Search and Rescue intends to update their GPS training materials, including U.S. National Grid. So that'll be a good place to start. But as Ray mentioned, it's really important to have your own internal standard operating guidelines, and you can actually see a little bit of what the National Urban Search and Rescue System has put together on this website here, www.responsesystem.org. Over on the lower right, there's a GPS information link that has all sorts of training and really SOGs on how they're using GPS during wide area search. So remember, using U.S. National Grid for every day and every operation is really the best way to get comfortable. But perhaps one of the best ways to do this is just to start practicing right now. I hope you continue to follow along with the presentation here. But if you go to usngapp.org, there's a free app there that you can save onto your mobile device if you know how to save it onto your home screen. You can bookmark it on your laptop as well. And this is an application that simply will use your device's location to show you what your U.S. National Grid coordinates are. It'll even tell you your horizontal accuracy. And I've actually used this recently on a roadside emergency to relay some coordinates to a 911 dispatcher. Another resource that's out there, for those of you that are using map books and you're working with GIS specialists, when they produce PDF maps, they have an option to spatially enable those PDFs. It's called the geospatial PDF. So one app that I've been using is a free app called PDF Maps, and it's available on all the app stores. And it's a really simple application that allows you to take a geospatial PDF, like the one we used today during the training. You can load it onto your phone, and since your phone knows your location, you can interact with that geospatial PDF out in the field. So that's something that's worth looking into. I know they do use it in the fire service, and it's sort of a lower tech solution combined with a high tech solution like a cell phone. So please do check out those resources. So now that you've got some guidance on how to use paper maps, GPS, and even mobile devices with the U.S. National Grid in our day-to-day operations, let's take a look at how it's really made a difference in disaster operations. Everything starts with location, and I think you'll find that that's true here with our next presenter, Chief Baraki.
Thank you, Paul. Ray and I will be doing this together. And first of all, the South Carolina flooding event that occurred in the late September, early October time period was really unprecedented. People want to relate it back to Hurricane Joaquin, which certainly there was a hurricane that was brewing off the coast, but really it was an extratropical cyclone, a nor'easter, that came together and provided what we would consider to be unprecedented rainfall that not only hit South Carolina, but certainly hit the rest of the East Coast. But in this case, as you'll see in the next slide, you'll see really amazing from an infrared video from NOAA. It gives us an idea of just how the rainfall just almost inundated the border from the south side of the north side of Georgia and the South Carolina south border all the way up into the border to the north, or the North Carolina-South Carolina border, how that rain just inundated just strictly between those boundary lines and just gave South Carolina a drubbing. And it's amazing to see that video. For Ray and I who lived it, to now see the video and you know, just put process with practice is amazing. So as we progress to the next slide, you know, some of the stats, it was a 500-year event per se. Some people in Columbia described it as a 1,000-year event. 24.23, 24 1/4 inches of rain fell in the Boone Hall area just by 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 4th. The International Airport in Charleston reported 24-hour rainfall of 11.5 inches by October 3rd. So We had a lot of power outages. There was certainly a lot of water. Major road and thoroughfares were washed through. 95, for example, made it difficult for Ray and I to navigate our troops through there. So how did we get involved? As being one of the 28 national USAR teams, us and Virginia 1. Virginia 1 is located up at Fairfax County in Northern Virginia, and we're located in Virginia Beach. And we brought 80 members to South Carolina, and our initial dispatch was to the Charleston area. And we were a Type 1 task force, which consists of 80 members. We also had 5 canines, which were 4 live and 1 human remains dog, and we deployed down on October 4 and arrived October 5. Our convoy consisted of 3 tractor trailers, 2 straight trucks, a couple tour buses with our members, and we had some other support vehicles. But when we arrived at 9 o'clock on October 5, we realized that most of our routing was not going to allow us to get to our point of arrival, or POA, that we had identified, because a lot of the areas were washed out. So, and we'll play in that a little bit more, but as you can see in this slide, how do we, the USAR team, get activated? So basically in this case, the governor requests a state of emergency through localities, and the state EOC will then call to Washington through the ESF 9 desk. Washington at the ESF 9 desk will have a declaration made by the president. The declaration will then allow us, the USAR teams, to be supported by what we call an IST, Incident Support Team, who then assigns, in this case, 2 task forces to go to the reported incident, in this case to South Carolina for the flooding event. As you see the top line there, the request is made from, let's say, right to left on your computer screen, but reporting goes from the task force to the IST, back up to Washington, and of course to the state EOC. And the reason that's important is data drives decisions. And so you have 2 federal task forces working for the state or local emergency responders, the IMTs, and everything we do has to be reported not only through Washington up to the president, but everything has to be reported also to the state local, so that they can have some kind of validity and identification that the tax money being utilized is actually worth it to them. So now as we progress to the next slide, we'll look at kind of the operations that we performed. So October 5, we were assigned which was called the Lower Richland County. And the picture that's kind of in the lower left corner, you can see some paper maps there. You see that's your planning done right on the back of a tailboard of an F-150 with ammo cans holding down your papers so they don't fly away. And that's all the mapping we had. We had Scotch tape, we had maps. Ray and I went into a convenience store on the way. We got off the state road and I would say raided a convenience store. We picked up some Swisher Sweets, a can of chew, and as many map books as we could find. And even tried to pay for them, but they wouldn't even let us pay for them. And that was how we had to deploy on day 1 to figure out where we were. We were given a 200 square mile area. In that 200 square mile area, we were given basically borders. And those borders were simple. There was a river and there was a road. And anything inside there had not been searched. It was underwater or had been underwater, one of the 2, and we had to go ahead and make some searches. So as you can see right now, we're kind of limited on our resources. We were provided shortly thereafter the collector app, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and that's what you see there on the visual on your left-hand side of your computer screen. We were using Garmin 60s in the collector app, and the collector app was provided to us by our FEMA overhead from our IST. We were able to log in with some passwords provided, and then with our mobile devices and our and our tablet-style devices, we were able to start doing collection of points. And these points, as you can see on the right-hand side of your computer screen there, you can see anything from damaged structure to if we found a deceased, if we found anybody who was in need of evacuation, if we had electrical issues, et cetera, all the way down. And we had about 25 points that we were able to mark. Those marks were made onto the collector in real time, either in the state EOC or all the way up to the federal level. They're able to see our marks, and they're able to track our progress live. What it prevented on the right-hand side, as you can see, is we call the FEMA tattoo. That's an actual picture in Haiti of one of our search specialists marking an area that we had searched. If you remember Katrina, and you remember some of the national events, that orange survey spray paint littered the communities. And FEMA gets a black eye, but that's the only way we can realize if we had been there and to prevent duplication of effort. But on your left-hand side, that is just as accurate to say that we're not going to duplicate a search area or provide resources somewhere that had already been searched. We progress to the next slide. And an example of how we're able to use our USNG and certainly our mapping to a benefit was we were called in the middle of our day to take a couple of Blackhawks to Williamsburg County. And to do that, we loaded 2 Blackhawks. You can see in the picture there behind the crew chief there's a Blackhawk that's turning hot. And we're getting our brief, and we're getting ready to load these Blackhawks with some K-9s and search and rescue members and go out there to Williamsburg County. As we land in the next slide, you'll see a field. And the field is actually the exact location of our land, and you can see there in the middle of the screen that we have a USNG that pins pointed down to what Ray described earlier as being a point on a map. As you can see on the left-hand side, you can see the Garmin I was holding is actually visual, and I took that picture for several reasons. And the main reason was that was my historical reference in case we need to be airlifted out, how to get out of Williamsburg County. We arrived on aircraft. There's no way out of the county except for by aircraft. And if I lost my batteries there, if I lost any other way, I decided to take a picture of it. And that proved to be kind of valuable in the future. We were being airlifted by members of McEntire Air Force Base. And as we progress to the next slide, you can see the waterways that were there, and the water had inundated the area, and we needed to be lifted out. So I was at the EOC at Williamsburg County, and they said, here are your coordinates. They handed me a laminated card that had already been described as our evacuation point, which was a ball field outside of the EOC. But I have to say that the coordinates in my hand that they handed me and the coordinates on my GPS were completely different. I called into McEntire Air Force Base for evacuation, and I said, let's go and use mine, and we'll see what happens. Within 20 minutes, the aircraft arrived, and they evacuated us off, for which the person who handed me the card ripped it up and was very upset with their person who provided their coordinates. The significance of that story is if Williamsburg County had to be mass evacuated, that was a point of arrival for the aircraft and their point of departure for their citizens. They don't know where their aircraft would have landed. I can tell you we're not landing in the same place we were evacuated from. So in essence, every time it counts when it comes down to evacuate your community is to have accurate coordinates. So as we were leaving, we were heading back out to the lower Richland County to go back and work in that arena. While we were in Columbia, we visited just under 2,000 structures. We marked 4,222 waypoints and 50 sites were with special consideration. That would be some of your hazmat sites, some of your large propane cylinders who are floating down rivers and that sort of thing. But look how accurate that is. You cannot get much more accurate than saying 1,932 structures. We used to estimate them. Now we don't estimate them, we actually deliver in real time. We then moved to Dorchester County, which is down near the Edisto River. And in that, you can see the picture there. We have fast-moving waters that were coming from the Midland. They're coming out to the coast, and we were faced with a different style of problem. As we progress to the next slide, you can see this is a collector app. And you see that's our work on the waterways. So that red line you see in the middle there is actually working the river. And the river is pretty challenging, but those are only accessible by water. And it doesn't matter if you're on land, if you're in a boat, if you're on an ocean, if you're in a river, is you get a true depiction of your performance based on this style of collector app. And you can see to the right where there's no damage, structural damage, heavily damaged, assisted evacuated, and all that. We are making our marks on our waypoints on that. As all the information was collected in the field, it was observed and analyzed in real time. And that is imperative to not only our state and local EOCs. I want to know how the performance is going, but sometimes, most of the times, whether it's Hurricane Sandy, whether it was this style event in South Carolina, the federal government wants to know our performance. The Department of Homeland Security wants to know our performance. They want to be able to report out what their USAR teams are doing. So this is a great map that they're using to distinguish that. We cleaned up and went home on October 11. Some of what we did was we visited, we traveled 1,244 miles by ground, 110 miles by air, 12 nautical miles on the river. We visited almost 2,000 homes in Richland and Dorchester, 4,850 waypoints, and we cleared 4 extremely hazardous sites. Those are all wins for the USAR team and certainly for Virginia too. Lessons learned. There's so many, but we'll just say this is one, is we had situational awareness based on our people utilizing Garmin's. the collector app and paper maps is we have to always be better than we are the day or the minute before. We have to always develop and have situational awareness. That GPS is very related. In fact, that proficient use is not only just by Ray and I, but all the rescue squad leaders and our search specialists have to be very good as well by utilizing these handhelds, because we can't be everywhere. Your experts can't be everywhere on an 80-person deployment. You have to have other people in your units and your groups that are very good at it as well. And finally, USNG with 3 dots behind it is every day we should be using the USNG, and that's a takeaway and lesson learned from South Carolina, and it'll be a lesson learned from every additional mission that we travel on.
Well, really, I'd like to thank you, Mike and Ray, for showing us how this all works. For those of you that are interested in the collector app, that really enabled them to quickly collect the data needed in the field, that was relayed up into the geospatial decision support tool. This is an application that uses something called ArcGIS Online. I've supplied some resources here on the slide, but please do send us an email at services@publicsafetygis.org if you're looking to get up and running with this app. It does require a little coordination with a GIS specialist, but as you can see, once the incident support team set this up for the USAR team, they were able to get up and running and providing data in real time. So thank you to Mike and Ray for that story. You'll notice thank you. You'll notice they ended with not the response phase, but the recovery phase, and that's a really important part of emergency management. And I think here, Richard Butkerite will present to us how U.S. National Grid can be used in the recovery phase, probably in a way not all of you have thought of before. So whenever you're ready, Richard, take it away.
Sure, thank you. You guys can hear me okay?
You sound great.
Sure can.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for joining us today and giving us a little bit of time to share some information on using the U.S. National Grid with you. I'm Richard Butkerite, the GIS Administrator and Information Management Section Head with the Florida Division of Emergency Management and the Florida State Emergency Response Team. And I'm going to follow up on this great testimonies we've seen of the use of the grid during response to tell you a quick story on the use of National Grid with another phase of emergency management during the response phase. Next slide, please. Earlier, you learned of some of the guidelines for using the National Grid, including the FEMA guidelines and the National Search and Rescue Committee. Here in Florida, we've taken adoption of the USNG one step further, formally adopting the grid as our location reference during emergencies, both in our statewide emergency response plan for our Florida Fire Chiefs Association and the state of Florida's Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. Here's the exact language from the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan adopting the USNG in Florida. Really a very simple one sentence that sets the stage for us to kick in all that we do to support use of the National Grid. Next slide. As we have learned so well here from our colleagues in Virginia, the use of the National Grid has been widely adopted within emergency management, particularly for use in response. Here in Florida, we use the grid along with our preparedness efforts demonstrated in the storm surge zone maps on the right and the special event planning with the map on the left, coordinating with DHS there for a special event here in Florida. And we've seen FEMA use the National Grid with recovery efforts, like the map in the middle from the tornadoes up in Alabama, I believe, when they were aggregating their damages to U.S. National Grid squares. And we can see that the support of using the National Grid goes all the way to the top at FEMA with a tweet there that I've shared from their director, Craig Fugate. Next slide. So like I said, our story to share today is focusing on the recovery phase for a disaster, where we discovered an opportunity to use the National Grid for data aggregation and accomplish something that previously we hadn't been able to do. So here's a map of damage assessments for Clay County, Florida, following flooding from Tropical Storm Debbie. The county dispatched initial damage assessment teams and collected data at their public service answering point from calls made to 911. The data was shared with the state in a tabular format with street addresses geocoded to latlong and U.S. National Grid coordinates. We aggregated the points to the U.S. National Grid, intending to aid in visualization of damage and assist in prioritizing resources. But like I said, what we found was also an opportunity to share data with FEMA and visualize something that had been previously undoable. Next slide. So here's simply the map aggregated by 1,000 meter grids, where we've taken all those damage assessment points and aggregated them and given them the counts and totaled them and given them some symbology there to indicate the areas of largest damage. Next slide. We tried other methods of aggregating, including zip codes, but we found out it just didn't work due to zip codes crossing jurisdictional boundaries like counties and also not being contiguous. I might not be able to see it too clear on the map there, but there's an example of a zip code there that's not contiguous. It's in two different areas separated by some space. So we just figured out that aggregating by zip code to kind of give us some kind of pie charting or capability just really wasn't working very well. Next slide. And now also on to the other part of the story. Following a disaster, a type of federal assistance is individual assistance, which is financial or direct assistance to individuals and families whose property has been damaged or destroyed as a result of a federally declared disaster. This data is of interest to emergency managers as it both helps establish the extent and scale of damage, as well as very important to recovery, as it pinpoints those who will need assistance the most in recovering. So what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is the pinpointing of the data. FEMA can't actually share that pinpoint data due to issues with personally identifiable information. So they will give us a statewide PDF displaying the locations of those who have applied for assistance via their website, their 1-800 number, and or in person at disaster recovery centers set up after a disaster. However, that map provided in the statewide PDF with no, and it's really a dumb PDF, meaning you can't use it as a GeoPDF and get the data behind it. The statewide map has removed a lot of the tactical use of this information our local emergency managers could take advantage of. Next slide. So what we found is working through the geospatial unit at the joint field office that FEMA set up following the disaster, they would share the total count of their individual assistant applicants per 1,000 meter. The result is that the emergency manager can now effectively visualize both sets of data. Where are the areas hardest hit by this disaster, and within those areas, how many of those affected have applied to receive assistance? When those numbers appear close to each other, are we done with the short-term response, and now we can shut down their disaster recovery center? Or if those numbers do not appear close to each other, is there more targeted public outreach needed? Media campaigns, send teams door to door. Are there other factors? The affected populace may not apply for federal assistance as they have high social resiliency or insured or other reasons that may be driving why those numbers might not be the same. Next slide. So this is really just a inset map focusing on and showing you where we now have the count on the left is the initial damage assessment done by the county, and the count on the right is the number of registrations with FEMA for those who need assistance. So it begins to give you this visualization to allow you to accomplish the things which I spoke about just a few minutes ago. All right, so next slide. So moving on to conclude my very brief story here, I appreciate everybody hanging on so long for this great presentation. You've really received a lot of information, and I'm happy to be able to come in and give you this last little bit to top it all off. But the USNG has certainly proved useful for preparedness and response phases of emergency management. And in this opportunity, we learned of using the U.S. National Grid during the recovery phase, specifically using the grid to aggregate and share data that had previously not been shareable, resulting in useful information for the Florida State Emergency Response Team. And once again, we've seen that U.S. National Grid is truly the language of location. So with that, I would thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it right back over to Paul to bring us home.
Well, thanks for explaining how USNG is really more than just a point reference system. Here we looked at it as an area reference system. We hope that these short presentations and exercises were helpful in getting these key points across. Remember that US National Grid provides a unified language. It transforms data into actionable information in a uniform format. It provides us with a consistency that no other coordinate system has provided. And finally, you'll see here through the examples, this has provided, US National Grid has provided interoperability in both the connected and disconnected environment, and that's really critical. We at the Natslike Foundation are committed to helping you connect with GIS regional leadership teams. I encourage you to go to the Natslike Foundation site where you can see who some of the GIS leaders are in your area. And we'd like to thank the following people for both content and support. Orange County Sheriffs, the FEMA Incident IST team, the NASAR, and also the National Search and Rescue Committee. And finally, great resources found on the USNG Center as well. With that, I know we're a little bit behind. We had some technical difficulties to get through, but I would like to thank our presenters and see if anyone has anything else to add. Otherwise, I will be on the line for a little bit to look at some of the Q&A and see if we can address some of that.
Great, thank you, Paul. I will go through a couple of the questions that we've received from a number of the different participants here and let the panel provide responses. This will go on for about 5 minutes, so for those who need to drop off, you're welcome to, but we would like to cover just a couple of quick questions. Okay, great. One of the questions we have, and hopefully this hasn't been answered already, but what is the advantage of using USNG over latitude, longitude during an emergency event?
I certainly can take that, Ms. Rebecca. The biggest advantage is that it's a simple. I don't want to say foolproof, because anybody can transcribe numbers incorrectly. But when you get down to when we're operating in one area and we already know that our grid zone designation for that area is 18 Sierra. And then you know that 100,000 meter square ID is uniform Jericho. And then you can just you can compress some of your communications and start spitting out the grid coordinates, confirm all the information ahead of time, but you can start spitting out grid coordinates, and there is less likelihood. Some of the research has been shown that the USNG, the errors have been as low as 13%, and that was a study done, gosh, I think it was in 94 as some of the reference material that I've looked at, and redone in 98. So when you start, that is something visually that people understand that when you get you can break it down into smaller, you eat the elephant one bit at a time, you break it down into smaller pieces, and therefore it makes it a little bit easier, and it is something that you can cross-reference into your communication centers, from the dispatchers to all across the format. So for the FEMA world, the USAR world, certainly that's how we're getting our information right now. And you can still use that, cross-reference that with your GPS as well, just what we talked about earlier when you have the two screens selected. You can still cross-reference that, but it's just an easier way of doing things. It's an easier system, it's truncated, so it's just a more efficient way of doing business, if that makes sense.
Excellent, thank you. Do any of the other panelists want to add to that feedback as well?
Sure, this is Richard. I would contribute some if you'd like.
Great, thank you, Richard.
I think one thing that, we didn't focus on it so much in this presentation probably, but one of the real advantages of the grid is how it is both a point and polygon reference system. And particularly when you start working with the points and you basically increase the precision of the position by adding more digits to the point, it really can be very accurate. so that you can get down to specifying a position, you know, by centimeters. If you have at all the other systems that can basically support measuring that fine. You know, we tend to use 1,000-meter grids, the 100-meter grids for kind of our efforts, but I can certainly see how even in efforts like archaeology or other kinds of disciplines, you may need to use, you know, 1 meter or smaller grids, as well as always be able to just give the position reference in addition to that, you know, the kind of the grid reference in addition to a position reference there. So just the way how it kind of switches back and forth, able to describe both points and polygons, I think is very useful. And it certainly has all the accuracy that you could need to for any of your position reporting.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Richard. And I actually think that this particular question, the feedback from the panelists on this, it really highlights the importance of today's session and why we're doing this and why we're encouraging the community at large to use and implement the USNG day-to-day and for large-scale incidents. So there are a number of other questions, but seeing that we are at 3:15 Eastern Time, I'm going to request that we close out for today. And please, folks, do visit the USNG resources link that you see up on your screen. There are a number of questions that I see in the question area that are answerable using the link and the resources at that link. So please check that out. It should help address a number of the other questions. Thank you. And I believe that this concludes our session today. Thank you, everyone, very much for your time, and thank you very much to all the panelists who contributed a lot of expertise and their time in putting today's session together. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.